Hello and welcome back to another brand new list for 2018. I know these are coming out later than usual, but I've been caught up with a lot of other different things, and personally I've been distracted by a lot of other different things, such as some new games that have come out recently, and doing some other work on the side. So when it comes down to these lists, thank you for your patience. Granted, not a lot of people are really clamoring for these lists, but we're gonna continue anyway. So 2018 was filled with goods and bads and some okay movies, but there are some films out there that were just kind of meh and somewhat disappointing on the other end. And these are the films that are that. And out of all of them, all 100 and some odd films I've seen, there were around, I want to say 16 films. So we're going to go down the list and talk about each of the ones that made the mad list. So let's begin with...
Sick. She's not well.
Claras Ghost, on the one hand, when I initially reviewed it for my Eastern Oregon Film Festival sort of bracket, I was a little bit more heavy on this one, considering it is a first-time director, but considering it's a first-time director, in retrospect, it's not as bad as I thought it really was. In retrospect, there was some pretty good performances here and there, especially from the mother character and the father character, and even a surprise cameo by, well, the Sixth Sense kid, Haley Joel Osment. But what really didn't work about this film is this sort of ghost element. And I understand that they were wanting to go for a New England style ghost story, but it just doesn't gel, because like you have this really interesting family drama within the mix. Granted, while some of the side characters aren't that enjoyable, especially like the sisters and the husband, I really did feel for the mother in this movie, how she was constantly abused, verbally abused by her kids and even her husband. But I think it would have been a lot better if we just saw the character just slowly progress into madness over the course of the night, without the use of the ghosts. And I think you would have had something better. Something much better. But that isn't to say that I didn't like this film. There were some enjoyable elements. I just felt like, first-time directors are not necessarily good on their first start. And I hope that the director for this film, that director takes what they learned from this film and how people responded to it, and just kind of continue to make the next project better. That's pretty much the best advice anyone can give to any artist, is that criticisms are not bad. To critique a piece of work is not bad. It's all about how you accept the criticism that really defines who you are as an artist.
Do people assume all your problems got solved because a big, strong man showed up?
Yes! What is up with that?
She is a princess!
Ralph breaks the internet.
I was more than disappointed with this film, but I wasn't going to say that this was one of the worst films of the year. This still had some pretty funny jokes in it. The animation is still top-notch, especially from Disney and Pixar, who still do their best. And for me, what really didn't make it over the edge for me was the whole story. See, the original was built on the whole nostalgia of arcade cabinets, and the prospect of going on the internet is actually pretty interesting, considering that the internet is so full of, like, online games. It would have been pretty cool to see, like, Tracer from Overwatch interact with Wreck-It Ralph or any of the other online multiplayer games. But when it came down to it, it just fully disappointed in that aspect. I mean, the whole point of the original was to focus on video games, and this one just didn't. It had Slaughter Race, definitely, but when it came down to it, the rest of the whole movie just played off like, oh yeah, I just recently read the Internet for Dummies book, and let me relay to you what I've learned from this piece of knowledge. And that's kind of one of the most disappointing aspects about this movie, is that it just kind of flounders on the concept of, an arcade cabinet character interacting with online multiplayer characters. I thought it would be kind of like something like Ready Player One, which, had all these different IPs and characters coming together. Like, even in Ready Player One, they had Tracer from Overwatch interacting with Battletoads. Like, I thought that was really cool. And to have Wreck-It Ralph do the same thing, but do it kind of like, oh yeah, everything's on the internet, I thought would have been really cool. But unfortunately, they kind of scrounged the idea. And while the character stuff here is decent, Ralph as a character just kind of fails because he has to keep relearning this lesson, which is going to be a common theme somewhere down the line on this list. But for me, Wreck-It Ralph, learning to be kind of a platonic friend isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think that's a really good lesson that people need to learn, is that sometimes you have to be a bit platonic with friends, especially those you want to keep close to you. I think that's good, but it's just kind of shrouded under this very hollow attempt at satirizing the internet. I think Wreck-It Ralph 2 just was kind of that sort of disappointing sequel that I was afraid of.
What? Max?
The Grinch.
The Grinch is one of those movies and books that I have read as a child. The original, Chuck Jones animation is one of my favorite things to watch during Christmas. It's definitely one of the better ones to watch during Christmas. But the biggest problem with this one, even though it is, in my opinion, Illumination's best attempt at a movie, I still think it just kind of falters because you have a character like the Grinch, who is, in the definition of the song, he is a crooked person with yellow teeth, with termites in his smile, who is a complete asshole to everyone. And in this one, he's just kind of toned down. And even his character design doesn't really reflect the song itself. And I just kind of found that kind of weird. Like, it's just kind of this weird polar opposite sort of thing. Did the animators just think, oh yeah, we're going to have an opposite day, so we're just going to make the Grinch into a nice looking soft character? I mean, the Who's actually look like Who's from the original animated movie, but with 3 dimensions. But I just didn't think it quite matched. I didn't think the Grinch's design quite matched what the illustration had from the book, or even from the Chuck Jones animated film. I would definitely recommend it for families. I mean, it's still kind of enjoyable. It's just not that great. And I think it, on the end of it, I was just kind of meh. At least it is better than the Ron Howard version. I'll give it that. But when it comes down to it, it's still not going to beat out the original.
Okay, well, he seemed like a really nice guy at the start.
This one was not as bad as I thought it was going to be, but on the whole, Goosebumps 2 Haunted Halloween wasn't necessarily my favorite film of 2018. It definitely had a lot of dumb shit happening. I actually really liked the first act, where it just kind of reminded me of like watching the old 90s TV show, and I really enjoyed that aspect. But once Jack Black got into it, and I know some people wanted a bit more connectivity between the first and second one, to have a little bit more connectivity between the first and this one. But honestly, I think it would have been better if Jack Black wasn't there. What if this was just like, an episode of the TV show? What if it was, what if it just kind of broke the fourth wall and was like, oh yeah, Slappy took over Hollywood? What if that was something, Granted, it would not have been a really good idea, but I think it would have been better than what we got, which is kind of this boring, kids film that is, in the end, inconsequential to everything, and that's kind of what I really thought. As much fun as I had with that film, it just didn't live up to the first. Like, the first one is okay. Like, it's an okay family film to watch during Halloween. But the second one, I don't know. There's a couple aspects I really like. Like the giant balloon spider was kind of funny, but everything else just didn't quite work for me, especially Jack Black, who just comes in like in the third act of the film and basically almost does nothing. That's just kind of like, oh yeah, Jack Black's R.L. Stein. Okay, we'll have him there as a cameo, and unfortunately, that just doesn't work for me.
We're taking you down.
How are you gonna do it? What are you gonna do? You gonna fart on me? We wanna have a dance-off?
You gonna annoy me to death with your waffles?
Teen Titans Go to the Movies was one of those films that, on the first viewing, I really despised, but when I look back at it, I'm like, okay, this really isn't as bad as I thought it is. Granted, it does have, the general kids movie tropes of like, oh, you gotta have poop jokes, you gotta have fart jokes, you gotta make really dumb character decisions, you gotta do all this stuff, you gotta have a, second act breakdown, you gotta have all this stuff. But there is some genuinely funny and dark humor that's in this. Like, there's that joke with the parents going down Crime Alley. Like, at first they're like, okay, go down this alley instead of Crime Alley. And then, once they screwed everything over, they go back and just shove, like, Bruce Wayne's parents down the Crime Alley. I just thought that was hilarious. Especially also with, like, the death of, like, Aquaman. How they killed him with, like those little can rings. Like, that's some dark shit that I never would have expected from a kid's film. And I thought that was pretty cool. But the rest of it, on the end, is just like, it's not my favorite superhero movie of the year, but it's not the worst. There is some definite problems with it in terms of pacing and overall, like, mixtures of tone that don't quite even up. But I thought Teen Titans Go to the Movies was...
He's gonna kill us.
Bad Samaritan was that one movie that came out, and not a lot of people really watched it. It was an Oregon-made film with David Tennant from Doctor Who, and it was just about him as a serial kidnapper who has like this weird fetish with horses for some reason. And the film is shot kind of okay. It's not necessarily the most well-constructed thing, but the thing that really pushes it over the top is just like this guy and his like lust for equestrian like rearing. Like, he has to rear his like kidnappees, as if they're horses, and it's just kind of weird. The main character himself has plenty of conflict, I guess, but it's not fully, explored. And I just felt like, overall, with all the twists and all that stuff, it just kind of felt like the main character got off pretty lucky. Like, he didn't actually earn his victory, because, like, all this time, like, David Tennant's character is always one step ahead of, the main character. And the way he goes about dispatching of David Tennant, the main character going after David Tennant, just kind of felt too lucky to me. But it's, I don't know. I just thought Bad Samaritan wasn't that great of a film. The Pain of Others. I mentioned this one in my Eastern Oregon Film Festival recap, and while I still think that it's still a very intriguing look at the lives of some of the weirdest people on the internet, for me, I would have liked it to have been a little bit shorter. Just kind of shorten it down to around 70 minutes. It was already, almost 80 minutes long. If you cut a little bit off of it, it probably wouldn't have affected the storytelling of the documentary in the first place. But when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, I'm just kind of like, eh. And that's mostly because on the internet, I've kind of already experienced some of these batshit crazy people that the film kind of portrays. Whether it be Alex Jones or all these other weird, wacky-ass people. Like, I've already seen that before. And for this film to come out and not really kind of provide anything else other than, hey, you just make up your own mind about it, I'm just kind of like, okay, sure. All right. I'll just solidify my own beliefs.
You gonna get on him next? He's not riding.
Next up is Lien on Pete. This one keeps getting, put on people's best lists a lot. For me, I just didn't get it. I just didn't get Lien on Pete. Some people have compared it to, like, Catcher in the Rye, and I guess on some level you can, but the thing is that for me, I never got a sense of who the main character was. And maybe that's because the first time viewing it, I didn't get it. Maybe if I watch it a second time, I'll better understand it. But when it comes down to everything for me, when it comes down to actually enjoying the film, it's really not that enjoyable. Like, in the trailers, you see Steve Buscemi a lot, but he's only in it for, I don't know, 10 minutes? And then the rest of the movie is just this kid trying to escort this horse to some place. And I'm just like, okay, what's the point? Like, I understand, like, he likes this horse, and maybe it's some sort of connective piece to his father or some bullshit. I never quite understood it. And maybe I need to rewatch it, give it another chance, and maybe update the list some other time, but for me, Lien on Pete was just kind of boring.
Okay, I gotta get out of here.
Arizona is weird. It's Danny McBride doing this sort of shtick of, oh yeah, the banks took away my house, or they're gonna take away my house, and for context, really. Arizona is set during 2009 during the housing crisis, which, there was another film that kind of did the same thing and focus on it, The Big Short. But this film goes for a more, like, thriller feel, because you have this real estate agent who gets kidnapped by Danny McBride, and it's pretty much, Danny McBride's whole shtick is, I hate realtors because realtors sold me on a lie. And that's why I'm broke as hell, and I have this, very expensive house. And it's like, I don't know. I kind of felt like a lot of the emotion that was in those scenes are just as empty as all the houses in that whole neighborhood. It just, for me, I didn't find it, I found certain parts of it entertaining. I like when Danny McBride is, like, going around his house and escorting the realtor around, just going like, hey, this is this room, and this is this room. And I'm like, this is kind of an odd scene, but I kind of enjoy it, considering the rest of the film is just kind of, I mean, it's just, meh. I don't really have anything else to say about Arizona other than maybe that one scene and Danny McBride's kind of crazy shit. But the rest of it, I don't know. It's not that great. Early Man was kind of a disappointment for me, considering the fact that I'm pretty much used to AntMan animation. I really enjoy their Wallace and Gromit shorts. I really enjoy the Wallace and Gromit movie. I enjoy Shaun the Sheep. I enjoy Chicken Run. But this one was just kind of an odd film to do. I mean, I like the idea. You got, like, cavemen who are challenged by the metal guys, and they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna challenge you to a soccer match. So it kind of turns into, like, this weird quasi-Space Jam movie, but with soccer. I mean, sorry, football for all you, British people. Sorry. But on the whole, when it comes down to it, unless you have the sensibilities of British people and their relation to football, there's really nothing else here. It is worth a watch if you are a fan of AntMan, but on the whole, I just kind of found myself going, I was just kind of bored. This one's going to be a really complicated one, this next one, since a lot of people seem to really like this film, but I don't. And let's take a look at what it is. Okay. Put down your guns. Put away your keyboards. I understand that for a lot of you, The Incredibles 2 was this sequel that everyone was waiting for. So was I. I was really waiting for this film. But I unfortunately was very disappointed, mostly because I hyped myself up. But when looking at the film again, there's a lot of narrative flaws with this. Like the whole stuff with the Devers, especially Screenslaver. I think the sort of plan, the moral plan that character had could have been more integrated with like everything else going on. Like, what if there was screens that were being used to hypnotize people to steal banks or whatnot? Like, there's this whole video series done by Nando V Movies, and I highly suggest you check him out. But he recently did a rewrite of The Incredibles 2, and I actually agree that a lot of that film needed some reworking. Like, it should have been more about, why people love comic book movies, because, the current sort of debate around comic book movies and how they're effective in society has been kind of back and forth. You get people like Bill Maher who just don't understand it, and then you get people who are extremely on the side of, comic book movies, and they're like, oh, they're never going to go away. And, you could have made something like that. And the character himself, or herself, or whatever, Screenslaver, when you think of Screenslaver, you think of, like, media. So why not actually do something with that? Like, there wasn't really much there other than the fact that she wanted to frame supers, and even that plan is just kind of wonky. But I will give it this. The animation is top notch. The action sequences are still enjoyable. You still have characters that are still enjoyable. I still say the best action scene in the entire film is Jack versus the fucking raccoon, which I found hilarious the first time watching it. But the rest of the movie, when I keep rewatching it, I just kind of find myself not enjoying it as much as I did the original. And I don't quite know why. It's not it's a bit disappointing, for me at least.
You're gonna recite your poems, and we're gonna publish a book that has your name on it.
Hello, can you help me?
When it comes to schooling, I think we can all agree that school is not as good as we think it is. Even I, who was disillusioned by getting these high grades just because I wanted the high grades and the high accolades, like, I also kind of understood at the time that school wasn't necessarily that beneficial. Like, there were some things that don't quite work. And this film is basically about a teacher who wants to pretty much extort one of her prodigy kids into, doing these poems in front of her so that she could steal those poems from him. And I don't know. I think for me this was one of those pseudo-intellectual films that was trying to point at something but definitely doesn't point at anything. I kind of found myself just kind of nodding off every 10 minutes. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was the performances, or maybe it was the drab color palette. I just didn't find myself enjoying this one as I thought I was going to. Like, I saw a trailer for this in, like, a small theater, and I thought to myself, oh, this could be really good. And then I watched it, and it was boring. Yeah, that's a common theme in this list. This is another documentary I saw at the Eastern Oregon Film Festival, and it was about the gun debate. And it was made around 2013, but it never got finished until around 2017. And the gun debate is still raging on today. And for me, making a film like that in a time like this, I don't know. For me, it just kind of is just kind of like yelling into the void. Like, everyone's already talked about this issue so much that when you keep making films like this, it just doesn't really add anything. And the film itself doesn't really add anything to the discussion other than there are people with sensible rules of gun rights, and then there are insensible people who know gun rights, and then you have all these people that don't want guns, and then you have these people, it's basically a generalization of everything, and there's not much here to really kind of point people into a different direction if you're on the fence about the issue of guns and gun regulation and gun safety.
Hey, what'd I miss? We were just tiny!
Ant-Man and the Wasp was one of the most disappointing superhero movies this year. Considering the fact that the original was co-penned by Edgar Wright, one of the best directors working today, and it was, the original had this sense of like a nice little thriller slash crime heist movie, and for the stuff that, Edgar Wright penned himself, that stuff is actually good. But with Peyton Reed's stuff in that film, it just came off as kind of like a TV movie, and it just didn't work. And so, unsurprisingly, when it came to Ant-Man and the Wasp, his direction in that film is pretty much a TV movie. Like, the color palette, it looks flat a lot of the times, which is so absurd, because you're dealing with a blockbuster film. A film that's made for $150 million, and yet you make it look like a TV movie. Especially in the script writing process, it feels like a TV movie. And I'm like, I was baffled by it. It's definitely not one of the worst movies. I just felt very disappointed because they set up a lot of stuff in, Ant-Man 1, and while some of that is paid off in Ant-Man 2, in the end, I was just kind of like, okay, I guess. It's not the most offensive Marvel film to date, but it's not my favorite Marvel film. And for this one to be the film that leads into the next wave of movies, Captain Marvel and Avengers Endgame and Spider-Man Far From Home, I'm just like, this wasn't the best way to kind of end your 10th anniversary on. Just saying. And those were all the films that made my meh list, or even disappointments list. So, what were some of your disappointing films of 2018? What do you think of the films I put on here? Make sure to comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next list. Peace.